everyone. Happy Wednesday. So Tara and I were just talking, and she's like, "Why are you not recording this? Because this is interesting." So I was listening to the Morning Wire podcast. So you can go and get like the exact numbers from them because I didn't write it down. But they were saying that so far there are record numbers of early voters. And I guess in certain states, like swing states, Nevada, I think possibly Pennsylvania, you can't see like who they voted for, but you could see that X amount of Republicans voted, X amount of Democrats voted. And they said that for the first time in history, Republicans are outpacing Democrats in early voting. And like they're talking about millions of votes. And they were saying if this pace holds up, then we will most likely know who the winner is before election day is even here, which is like so wild to me. But I think people are maybe worried about some funny business on election day, and so they're eager to go and cast their vote.
But see, I don't even get how this really works with early voting because do they get to look at the ballots ahead of time? Do they know who people voted for? Because part of me thinks like, does this give them more of an opportunity to cheat and rig the election if they have all of these votes in beforehand as
So I
opposed to
don't
the day
know.
of?
I mean, my gut tells me like if they're going to cheat, they're going to do it again on election day at 2 in the morning when it's so chaotic. And like, when you go to the poll on election day and there's so many people there and everyone's kind of like rushing, I think it like gives you more accuracy because people aren't so rushed. And like for example, I was listening, this is totally separate, but on TikTok, a woman was talking about how she went to the polling place and she had an issue where her it wasn't accepting her ballot. And so she was able to go and talk to the poll workers and they were able to figure it out and make sure that her ballot was read. So I guess it is going into the system, but I don't think that they're announcing like the actual results until probably election day. But they are saying this is how many registered Republicans did early voting versus Democrats. And it's looking favorable for Trump.
Which is awesome, and I hope it stays that way, but and this is totally off topic, but I almost think it would be better like, I don't know, at least from what I remember in my ballot, it says on the front of your ballot whether it's Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be better to just not identify fucking anything? Like, just you're voting, but nobody knows until they open the ballots. Like, you can't look at the outside and say, "Oh, this is a Republican ballot." I don't know. Maybe I'm not making
Well,
any
that's
sense.
the thing, because like I've many times have thought about switching to independent, but then like in the state of Florida, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to vote in the primaries.
Oh, okay.
So like, which I hate. Um, but yeah, I don't like that either because then people know like who you're, I don't know. I think either way they're gonna try and mess with things.
Yes, definitely.
So,
We already
but
know
I
that.
just thought that was a good sign that so many people are showing up. And I think people are probably getting out there early too, because like for me, I'm thinking, well, I should, because what if there's another hurricane and then I can't vote on election day because, everything's shut down or ruined or who knows.
Wouldn't
Just
that be convenient?
exactly. Yeah. Anyhow, that's not even a part of our topic today. So you go ahead and talk about all the crazy shit you found this week. Man.
Well, I mean, this is basically the topic of conversation for everyone right now because the election's less than 2 weeks away, and, like, this is what the focus is. But there's a lot of other shit happening on the world stage that we're not focusing on because of the election that we need to be paying attention to, and today we're gonna talk about really what's happening with the war in Ukraine and how that's impacting what's happening here. And so last week, Zelensky presented what he's calling his 5-point victory plan for winning the war to the European Council in Brussels. And in the words of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who I honestly think is the only sane and rational world leader aside from Trump who actually wants peace, well, he said Zelensky's plan is, quote, more than terrifying, end quote. And I would have to agree. So, what does it entail? Basically, it's an all-out call for escalating the war with Russia, and it's exactly where we predicted Zelensky would take things when the United States and our allies gave these long-range missiles to Ukraine. And then we tell Zelensky, like, "Oh, but you can't use them," right? Like, Stephanie, it's like taking a kid to a candy store and filling the whole fucking basket full of candy and then saying, "Oh, just look at it, but you can't eat any of it." Like, obviously, the kid wants to eat the fucking candy, right? Just like Zelensky wants to use the fucking missiles. And clearly, the plan at some point must be to use them, or the warmongering Biden Harris admin and the US military industrial complex wouldn't have given them to Zelensky in the first place. And as a side note, which really this shouldn't even be a side note because it's fucking tragic, but it's not our topic. But as this, like, what's happening in Ukraine is entirely the fault of the military industrial complex supporting an unwinnable war. And yesterday, the UN reported that Ukraine's population has declined by 10 million. And that's a quarter of their total population. And this is since the start of the war. Now, some of this 10 million is due to refugees leaving the country, but the largest portion of it is the needless combat deaths. And there's also like a whole other side of this thing when it comes to declining birth rates. And like, I think this is all part of the global plan for depopulation, but that's a whole other podcast episode. And we're not going to get into that too much today.
But if I had to guess, I would say most of that 10 million is probably young people. It's the young people fighting this war, and it's the young people fleeing. It's not the older people who have their roots there. It's the young
Yeah.
people. So yeah,
Exactly.
it totally fits that depopulation agenda.
Yeah, which is like again like a whole other topic that we should probably cover at some point. But with this 5-point plan, I want to cover briefly the 5 points that Zelensky wants to. This is how he sees to quote end the war fairly. Okay. So, of course, the primary goal is to become part of NATO. Not a surprise. He wants a defense aspect. He wants approval to use long range missiles in Russia, economic growth and cooperation, which, I mean, aren't we already doing that? Isn't the US already funding Ukraine's economic growth, like considering all of our taxpayer money has been going to pay Ukrainian pensions and government staff? And then the fifth thing he wants is post-war security architecture, which I don't know about you, Stephanie, but my thought is like this has to be related to all the property that's being bought up and all the investments being made in Ukraine by BlackRock. And on top of that, there are three classified agenda items that are part of the plan. And publicly, those haven't been made known what they are, but reportedly, they're being shared with international partners, which I can only assume means the Biden Harris admin.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that that it's part of the plan to replace the Ukrainian population with the elites. This is the elite hideaway of the world where they can get away with anything. And I think everyone should go on TikTok and just search Ukraine. And you will see like all of these videos where their cities look immaculate. They look far better than any US city, and they are lined with top of the line luxury vehicles. And I'm talking like $100,000, $200,000 cars all up and down the street. Like it is insane. You have like their bars and their high-end restaurants are booming. And I mean, I would venture to say that it's us. It's the United States that is funding this. And it's the elites taking over this country. And it's like, how often have we had episodes where we're like, okay, we're sending yet another package of hundreds of millions of dollars to Ukraine? It's like too many to count. And guess what? It's happened again. No surprise. But not only did it happen once, it happened twice in 1 week. So, according to Defense News, quote, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made an unannounced visit to Ukraine's capital, Kiev, on Monday, where he met with President Zelensky and unveiled a package of $400 million in security aid, the second such package within a week. The assistance includes can't talk, artillery, and munitions, armored vehicles, and anti tank weapons like the shoulder launched Javelin system. The White House committed to sending hundreds of vital air defense interceptors in the coming months, end quote. So let's get this straight. In North Carolina, U.S. tax-paying citizens are getting no help from the government. They are relying on private, patriotic groups for aid, supplies, and rescue missions. A month later, there are still thousands of people missing. The only financial aid that's been announced was when Kamala said that they would get $750 that they have to apply for. But then they turn around and they take the tax dollars from American citizens and send another humongous aid package to Ukraine. Like, for what? It's just so crazy. So we can keep eliminating the Ukrainian population so the elites can have the land all to themselves. Like, everyone should be outraged by this. And at this point, I don't know why we're still paying our taxes. Like, why hasn't everyone just said, screw you, you're not managing our money, so you're not getting it? And so, like, clearly this pissed me off. Like, I was ready to throw my computer across the room reading this. But then this week, we find out that, quote, Ukraine expects to receive $1.6 billion from the US to finance domestic production of long range weapons, boosting the country's ability to strike military targets in Russia. President Zelensky said, according to this Bloomberg article that was published on October 22nd. So basically, they're going to just make their own missiles, but we're going to pay for that, of course, so that
Right.
they can go and strike Russia and like start World War. Like, it's fucking insanity. And of course, the mainstream news isn't going to cover it because it would be detrimental to Kamala's campaign. And that Bloomberg article went on to say an $800 million tranche to fund the domestic production of drones will arrive in coming days and will be followed by a second disbursement of 700 million to 800 million. I mean, why not? Just throw in an extra 100 million. And so this is what Zelensky told journalists on Monday after meeting with Lloyd Austin. Like, this is crazy. So 1.6 billion. And I just want to put this into perspective, okay? When you think about a million seconds is 11 days. A billion seconds is 33 years. We have sent nearly $200 billion to Ukraine thus far. 10 million Ukrainians are gone. And for what? Like, it's a regional war across the world with non-NATO nations that the US shouldn't even be involved in. Yet we've spent nearly $200 billion on this small country. And this is our money. Like, this is your tax dollars. And what are we getting with our tax dollars? We're getting endless wars. Every state's become a border state at this point. Homelessness and crime is in every city. Inflation is wild. And the American dream is destroyed. So, like, everyone should be outraged by this. This should be like the number one topic people are talking about.
Yeah, and on top of these insane aid packages, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced yesterday that the United States is, quote, very close to finalizing a $20 billion contribution to a broader loan package to Ukraine that supposedly is going to be repaid from the income generated by frozen Russian assets. And this is all related to a deal we made with the G7 back in June. And I was reading an article in Politico that was saying that this will allow the G7 to basically insulate money for the Ukraine war effort in case Trump gets elected. So we're going to hoard all this money and make sure it all goes to Ukraine in case Trump gets elected and actually wants to spend American money on American fucking people, right? Now, whatever, it's frozen Russian assets. But another thing she announced was that next week, we're going to be unveiling new sanctions against Russia. And this time, we're going to be targeting third party countries that are supplying Russia with their military technologies. So keep this in mind as we move further into the episode. This includes India, Malaysia, and Thailand. And we're also going to be targeting Russia's energy sector. And it's like the only way this war can keep going is with backing from the United States. Like the rest of fucking NATO, the rest of the European Union, it's all dependent on what we do, what the United States does. Zelensky even said this in a recent interview he did with Fox News. But my question is, Where's Biden? Where's Kamala? Why aren't we hearing anything from them? Because they know that Biden can't make any solid decisions about allowing Ukraine to send long range missiles into Russia until after the election. And even Lloyd Austin was totally vague in responding to Zelensky's 5-point plan. And he said, quote, "It's not my position to publicly evaluate his plan. We've been supporting him by providing security assistance in a major way for 2.5 years. We're going to continue doing that," end quote. Like, what the fuck?
It's where the elites are going to run when Trump gets in office to avoid being criminally prosecuted. That's why they're sending all this money there because they know that they're not going to be here. They don't care what happens in the United States. And it's like we've given them all this support and they still aren't winning. Just like you were saying, like this was supposed to be a 2-day war. And now it's 2.5 years later and there is no end in sight. And according to that article in Defense News, they said, quote, "But as Moscow's forces steadily advance in eastern Ukraine and reclaim territory lost in Russia's Kursk province, the future of the war looks increasingly bleak for Kiev," end quote. Then why the fuck do we keep funding a war that Ukraine is obviously not going to win? They've already lost a quarter of their population. So now their population's around 35 million people. Russia's population is around 145 million people. That's why I love Trump's answer, which is he wants people to stop dying. Like, this is insane. There's no way they're going to beat Russia. And according to that Bloomberg article, Ukraine and its allies think that Biden is going to be even bolder after the election. So basically, that way they don't have to worry about the election. But once it's over, they'll give Ukraine the whole farm before Biden leaves the White House. So it's like, even if Trump wins, they're going to do a lot of damage before he takes the White House. It's like they want to go out with a bang.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like we're fucked either way. Like they're still going to send all this money and resources to Ukraine. And the only difference is Trump can hopefully keep us out of, a full-blown war, but it's still all of, again, 200 billion something, 200 billion
Yeah.
fucking American tax dollars have gone to another country. It's fucking insane. And the other thing that we need to be paying attention to here is how alliances are growing as we edge closer to like all out war, really. And it was reported over the weekend that South Korean satellite captured the movement of thousands of North Korean soldiers going into Russia. And there's reportedly a plan to send about 12,000 troops in total from North Korea to help with combat operations against Ukraine. And this video allegedly shows these North Korean troops arriving in Russia, being outfitted with Russian equipment. This is all taking place at a training ground on the far east side of the country. And this is reportedly in addition to the 1,500 North Korean soldiers that have already been deployed in Russia. And during a session of the UN General Assembly on Monday in New York, a North Korean official denied that this was happening and said, "Oh, it's all just rumors." Then Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was asked about this by reporters on Monday. Stephanie, he pulled a straight up KJP move, dismissed the question, and said any inquiries into military operations should be directed to the Russian Ministry of Defense. So
They
just
should
like
not
when
be learning from KJP. Come on.
but it's just like when she knows something's going on and she's just not fucking commenting on it. And then even Lloyd Austin said he was concerned, but he couldn't independently verify troop movement yet. And I think we talked about this on a past episode earlier this year, but Putin went to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong un back in June. And it was a big deal because it was the first time that Putin had been there in like 24 years. And during that meeting, they created a strategic partnership where they agreed to provide mutual assistance and military cooperation. And throughout this ongoing war with Ukraine, North Korea has been supplying Russia with millions of artillery shells, just like the US is supplying Ukraine with weapons and ammunition and equipment. So it's like, can't really be surprised. But it's like, whether the rumors are true or not about North Korean troops training with Russia, they're contributing to the escalation of a global conflict that's continuing to spread beyond Russia and Ukraine. And now we have all these third party countries that are talking about getting directly involved in a war.
Well, yeah, and it's like, of course, they're creating alliances and they're gearing up for World War, is what they're doing. Like, why wouldn't they be when they see that the United States is arming their enemy with missiles and weapons to attack them? Like, obviously, they're going to do something about it. And like, we have just pushed them and pushed them. How many episodes have we said, like, this is going to be the thing? It's going to push us into World War. And they just keep poking the bear. And there is no question in my mind that the military industrial complex, AKA the elites, the real people in power pulling the puppet strings, they want a never ending war. And the puppets in the White House are too weak and too stupid to stand up to them. And like, this is terrifying that these big nations that have a lot of technical capabilities are basically forming these mega armies.
Yeah. And so yesterday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, he gave a statement and he said that North Korean troop deployment to participate in combat operations in Ukraine would represent a significant escalation. Like, no shit, right? And the UN is saying that this is a blatant violation of Security Council sanctions for North Korea and Russia to have their militaries work together. And so, what's the response? Well, South Korea is now talking about sending military personnel to help Ukraine, including intelligence officers that are specialized in like North Korea spy ops. And South Korean media is reporting that the government will provide Kiev with information on North Korea's military tactics, their doctrines, and operations. And South Korea's defense ministry gave a briefing this week where they stated they would, quote, consider with an open mind, end quote, to supply Ukraine with lethal weapons as well. And I didn't know this, Stephanie, but apparently South Korea is one of the world's top 10 arms manufacturers.
Okay, this sure sounds like World War to me. It's like all the pawns are being put in place. We now have every continent involved, except for
Yeah.
maybe like Antarctica or whatever.
And like we've talked about this so many times on the podcast, how we are not prepared for an all out war. We have our hands in too many pots. And this was confirmed recently by top US Army General Charles Flynn, who has been the top commander in the Pacific region. He spoke at the ALSA conference in Washington, D.C. last week, and he was talking about how these technology and military alliances are forming between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and that they're becoming a very dangerous combination and placing increasing pressure on American military resources. And I'm sure we mentioned this in a previous episode, but Russia's already receiving drones from Iran that they're using against Ukraine. They have economic backing from China. Russia's also helping Iran evade sanctions and arming Hezbollah and the Houthis, and they're engaging in military drills with China to show force against Taiwan. And so, like, all these factions are coming together. Like, we're seeing the clear alliances that are forming. And another thing that happened was the BRICS summit yesterday in Russia. I think it might still be ongoing, but Putin and Xi Jinping further strengthened their commitment to cooperation for what they're calling, quote, ensuring global security and a fair world order, end quote. So during the opening remarks of the summit, Putin stated that Russian Chinese cooperation in global affairs is one of the main stabilizing factors on the world stage. Xi Jinping said that the world's undergoing a major change that has not been seen in a century, and the international situation is chaotic. And as a side note, BRICS is now what, 10 countries? You've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. And Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Malaysia have formally applied for BRICS membership. And there are several other countries that have expressed interest in becoming members of BRICS. And in fact, I think there were representatives from 36 countries attending this summit. So while BRICS may not have impacted the US dollar yet, even despite all the sanctions we've been placing on Russia, China, and Iran, like if we get into war with Russia over Ukraine, like directly, and Russia's allies join their side, like it's possible that BRICS could become even more powerful.
Well, yeah, they could become the new world leader. And if we keep placing sanctions, all of these countries, the moment they decide to stop trading in US dollars, we are fucked. The dollar
Yeah.
will be worthless. And unlike the United States, they're going to back their currency with oil and gold, which we are
Yeah.
not. So, I mean, we're talking about a war, a physical war with weapons, but also an economic war. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not good. And the only chance we have is for Trump to get in there and use his relationships with these guys and negotiate a deal because you know it's not going to happen with Kamala. It's going to be the military industrial complex that are going to keep running things and keep poking the bear.
I don't even think it's going to be poking the bear if Kamala gets in. I think we will be
Yeah.
in a full on war. Uh, I mean, Biden's policies are abysmal. And can you imagine Kamala even trying to engage in directly in foreign policy? Like, no, this is literally Trump is our only hope, quite honestly, to prevent us from a full scale war.
Yeah, it blows my mind that anyone is still considering voting for her. Like, clear, I think it's people that aren't paying attention whatsoever at this point. It has to be. So, yeah, yet another terrifying episode, but an important one. And again, like the news isn't talking about this. No one's really paying attention to this. And I get it. There's so many things happening, but I think this should be at the top of the list. And like I said in the last episode, when looking at the whole abortion topic, which is like the topic that all these women and young people are voting on, maybe we should be asking them, okay, are you prepared then to go and fight or send your child to go and fight an endless war? Because that's what you're getting when you vote for Kamala.
Yep.
All right. Well, I hope everyone has a good rest of the week. And if you weren't going to vote before, you sure as hell are now, hopefully. So share this episode, get this out there so people know what's actually happening in the world and what's at stake. And we'll be back here on Friday. Thanks for tuning in.